So it seems to me as if the Clintons figured out how to turn their service into a business. And this charity, which is not regulated really by anybody, it's been defanged. It's not regulated by the attorneys general, by the solicitation people, the international people, is a perfect gathering place and a front to go around the world and act as if you're doing good things and bring powerful people together and concoct deals and make people rich, including the Clintons.
Give us a thumbnail of your background and why you've spent so much time researching and studying the Clinton Foundation.
For a long time, I did well in school and got into banking, and I was able to retire at the age of 46 and spent a fair amount of time just really doing whatever I wanted to do. Then I saw the credit crisis coming, and I called that out, and that got me into TV and radio because it was a topical thing. And I like complex problems. So somebody was saying to me, you know, I can't figure out this Clinton Foundation. And it sounded good on paper, and I should know something about how charities report, but I didn't really. And so last year in March, February, March timeframe, I turned my attention to the filings. And lo and behold, I was shocked at what I found. This is a case study. Why I got interested in the beginning was just a complex problem, and I like to try to solve those. But then when I realized the utility of this case is going to be, I think, in telling the story, exposing the full extent of this fraud, and then asking the question, how can the former president of the United States and an aspiring president of the United States, who are both very smart, I mean, they met at Yale Law School and they have the money and the team to get it right, how could it get so wrong? And how could it have been allowed to operate as a rogue charity, not only in every U.S. state, but in multiple countries around the world, with nobody saying, hang on, you can't do this? Actually, the people I speak to on the left, before I got into this, I did a fair amount of exposing of corporate fraud, and that took me into the logical Bloomberg, CNBC, Fox Business land. On this one, believe it or not, I spend a lot of time on progressive radio and progressive interviews, and it's the progressives who are furious looking at this, absolutely furious, because not only is the case so abhorrent, but it sets such a bad precedent. I mean, it could well be that a different team than the Clinton team wins this election, you know, and now you've had this operate in this way for 8 years. You know, do we want to give this other team the right to impose its vision of how the law, and then to persecute people who are, let's say, in Clinton land the same way that you know, the right was persecuted by Lerner? You know, the progressives are really inflamed actually here.
Imagine that you're talking to an ordinary American that isn't very versed in what's happening with the Clinton Foundation. What are the stubborn facts that you think the normal person needs to know?
That's an excellent question, you know, because people in America and around the world, they talk about the big names who give money to charity, but in reality, it's the people who don't have money as a group who give the most to charity, and they trust people like the Clintons and their trustees to actually be honest, and that the forms and the solicitations that they receive are true and accurate. The truth is, this foundation has been cooking the books since its first days. The first day it opened on October 23, 1997, when Bill was still President of the United States, when he was fighting all these scandals, when they needed to raise money, and there was a scandal that exploded. Charlie Tree had raised money for a legal defense trust, and that was exposed, so they needed another scheme, and this is what the Clinton Foundation started out as being. So to the ordinary Americans, we all give money to charity, whether it's in boxes or in somebody's cup on the street or a solicitation, and you expect those books to really reflect the true operation of the charity, and more important, you expect the charity to be authorized to do what it says it can do to help people. This charity has never been authorized to be anything other than a presidential library and archive and research facility in Little Rock. That's it. All these other fancy things that attract money, fighting HIV/AIDS, climate change, all that international work, none of that is authorized properly. So it is a crooked charity cooking the books. There are a lot of people who give money to the Clinton Foundation because they believe that Bill and Ira Magaziner and others have in theory been fighting HIV/AIDS. The truth is so diabolically different than that. When Bill Clinton and Ira Magaziner asserted that the foundation was beginning an effort to, in theory, fight HIV/AIDS after July 12, 2002. I know these dates because these are dates they admitted to. Neither Bill Clinton nor Ira Magaziner were officers or trustees of the Clinton Foundation, so they had no legal authority to do anything in the name of the Clinton Foundation. It was not authorized to fight HIV/AIDS at that time. And the efforts that they went to get these HIV/AIDS medicines, they didn't do the proper checking. And so there's a big story here as to exactly who was helped, were people hurt, what is the true story on HIV/AIDS, and that's something we should really dig into.
Imagine you're talking to someone, say I'm a parent of a child who died in service in the military, and I'm a Gold Star mother who's walking around Arlington Cemetery weeping at the loss of my child. And you know what you know about what Hillary Clinton and Bill Clinton have done as public officials. How do you explain their public service in light of the loss of human life for their country?
Here we have, in what you know about the Clintons, and we know a lot more about the Clintons and the administration thanks to all the WikiLeaks and everything else. It seems we have here, first of all, a bunch of incompetent, self-centered, profit-seeking people who are dedicated to living champagne and caviar lifestyles in private jets and presidential suites, but not because they've invented a better product or found a better way to serve in a competitive market. No, they're playing an inside game. They're trading off favors, they're taking money, there's no accountability, and it's one big party as far as I can tell. So you contrast that and also the derisive attitudes as reported that particularly Hillary Clinton had towards members in the service who were helping her in various events. It beggars belief. It just beggars belief that somebody would hold themselves out as being worthy to even clean the brass on the doorknobs at the White House, let alone run the free world from the Oval Office. Just beggars belief.
So, Charles, we're filming on October 27th, before the election, certainly. But just today, there's been New York Times, Washington Post, Wall Street Journal reports on a Doug Band memo to John Podesta in 2011. And it's got everyone talking about what WikiLeaks is putting out there. You've been on the Clinton Foundation for so long. What has these WikiLeaks things revealed to you? What new information up to now, October 27th, have you learned?
As far as the memo itself is concerned, it recounts multiple crimes. I mean, just in the first instance, it talks about how Terry McAuliffe had raised $100 million for the foundation by 2001 in firm pledges. There's no evidence of that in the 990s. The total cumulative income through 2001 is about $25 million. And they use, in their 990s for that time frame, all the way through 2004, they use accounting techniques that are not allowed, called modified cash basis accounting. You can't use that. That doesn't reflect the true nature of what was going on. So that's suspicious. Then it talks about how Doug was instrumental in creating revenues for Bill Clinton, Inc. I mean, he admits it, through the operation of the charity, and getting speech revenues and other business opportunities. I mean, it's just, there are so many counts, criminal counts recited in that memorandum that it beggars belief that Doug would actually have written that and turned it in to this law firm. Now, years ago, I worked for this law firm as a young kid, as a proofreader, and I can tell you, subsequently, I've stayed in touch with what they do. It's a preeminent firm. I mean, these are very smart people, and the team on looking at the Clinton Foundation case really understands global philanthropy issues, and specifically, narrowly, New York laws, which are really strict. So when Doug turned that memo in, I would have guessed that at least one member on the Simpson-Thacher team had a heart attack, just looking at the memo. Because how do you deal with it? I mean, here's somebody admitting that he and a whole bunch of people stand in the center of a criminal enterprise. Well, the process of running a foundation or a charity involves a lot of paper, it involves a lot of email, and it involves a lot of memoranda. beyond what a charity might release to the general public. So what's come out of the WikiLeaks stuff are some of these memos. Now, strictly speaking, a charity cannot be operated to create what is called private gain. Now, private gain doesn't mean monetary gain alone. It means create an edge or an advantage for the people operating a charity. And normally, what the IRS will look at carefully is they'll say, all right, your authorized purpose was to be whatever it was supposed to be, the library and archive out in Little Rock. What else did you do? And what gains have been created through the operation of this charity? So I, last year, spotted this Teneo thing as extremely odd, that you would have Doug Band basically and his group at Teneo harvesting contacts created through this convening thing, this Clinton Global Initiative, which we'll get to. That's also not a charity at all. That Doug would be able to create with his partners a vibrant business so attractive that at the end of 2014, early 2015, I think it was, this large institutional venture fund or private equity fund made a minority investment in Doug Band's firm. So obviously they saw tremendous potential in it. This is a gigantic fund. They wouldn't have put $1 or $2 million. They would have put a lot of money into this thing. So what is it that's so valuable about Teneo that seemed to be so inextricably linked to the Clintons? It just seemed to define, Teneo's activities seemed to define the polar opposite of charity. And in fact, illegal, criminal, what's called inurement. Inurement is where you appropriate private gains, where trustees create private gains for themselves and appropriate them. And here's Doug Band, who was a trustee of the Clinton Global Initiative. He was very much involved, as he says in this memo, helping to build the Clinton Foundation in the post-presidency from 2001 forward. So what this memo is, if it is genuine, and to date, and I think the thing came out yesterday, and so far nobody has said it's inauthentic or it's a forgery, which would have been, if it weren't authentic, you would have thought Doug Band and Teneo would right away say this is fake. But when you read it, very astute people I work with pointed out to me this morning that it says on it it's a second draft. So there's an earlier draft we may get to see, which some suspect may have more disclosures in it, possibly having to do with Chelsea and her family.
Reading what I've read so far, and think of the people who aren't reading all these details, it seems like Chelsea Clinton had some pretty salty exchanges with Doug Band and people that might be over Doug Band, John Podesta. And she was worried about, properly perhaps, people benefiting from her parents and from her father in particular. So what we're watching unfold in these emails from WikiLeaks through John Podesta's emails is Chelsea trying to look for good governance and some improved procedures. But what do you see in what you're reading?
Well, I see the first thing that I focus on with Chelsea is when she went down to Haiti after the earthquake, which occurred, I think, on the 12th of January 2010. She sent some emails back to her parents, a very long, thoughtful email saying, basically this is a mess and we've got to fix this up because, this is crazy what's going on down in Haiti. So you can tell that by, let's say, March of 2010 or thereabouts, she was obviously concerned. It's her own words. And she then commenced a process of trying to get her father and the people around her father and mother to actually take a hard look at this. And as a guest, Chelsea, to this day, may not understand just how fraudulent this enterprise is going way back when. I don't know her training in accounting. I don't know how closely she's looked at these audits. I don't know if she's got a real accounting firm helping her, and anybody would need help looking at this. But if she did have such a firm looking at this, they would have told her a long time ago, after your parents go, if this thing is still going to operate and you're going to be the chairman, you have big trouble here. Because what you have to do to try to fix this thing is you've got to go back and restate the books of the foundation from the very beginning. You've got to go all the way back. You've got to account for all this money. You're probably going to have to pay massive fines. You're going to have to plead before the IRS and say, listen, we were trying to do good. We got tripped up here. Yes, you should discipline us, but we're really intending to move forward. I'm the former president. Give me a break here. The thing that really jumps out of the band and then of another memo from Maura Pally is this incident in 2008. There's a footnote in the band memo where it talks about how after July 2008, in the HIV/AIDS operation, which we can talk about, which is illegal, they blew through either $23 or $28 million, and they admitted that. These guys up in Boston, Ira Magaziner, and a guy called Anil Soni, according to this memo, admitted that they had blown through, wasted, diverted, whatever you want to call it, $23 million. And the reaction of the parent foundation was not, we're going to fire you, we're going to report it, we're going to do whatever. Well, what we'll do here is we've got this so-called quasi-endowment. Now, there is no such thing as a quasi-endowment for a foundation. They had a slush fund, and they took some of what was in the slush fund, and they papered it over, and they made this crime go away. Well, I mean, that's a confession of a crime, a confession of another diversion of a crime, within the context of subsequently going out to the world and raising a $250 million endowment using this fellow Dennis Chang without ever disclosing your past sins. You're not allowed to do that. And I don't know Arkansas law particularly, I don't know DC law, but I do know New York law. And New York law is incredibly strict. When you raise an endowment for a foundation, the money must go just for that endowment. You can't use it for operating purposes. You can't lend it. You can't go to Las Vegas and gamble it. You've got to take that money and make sure that it is just sitting in the endowment. And if you go out and you try to raise a new endowment without telling people of your past sins, you're breaking all kinds of state, federal, and foreign laws. And that's something, generally speaking, people get really exercised about in the history of charities.
Why do you say, Charles, that this is Robin Hood in reverse?
Robin Hood and his merry band of thieves, in theory, stole from the rich to give to the poor. And what you see here is the opposite. Forget the Little Rock main purpose, the archive. Think about all the disaster relief efforts. And what you have is when there's a disaster, the Clintons come out of the woodwork and interpose themselves and their organizations between the aid flows that generous people around the world will send to the tsunami, the earthquake in India, to Katrina, to Haiti, to Papua New Guinea, to the AIDS victims in Africa. They stand in front of that aid money, and they say that they'll take it, and they say that they'll direct it to help these poor people. And what in fact they're doing is they're stealing from the poor, it seems, to aid their rich donor friends around the world with these various projects, whether it's Dennis O'Brien from Ireland and Haiti, or these natural resource kings, Frank Juster and others, Carlos Slim, around the world in these different projects for energy, for timber, for this, for that. And again, they've defanged the whole operation. There are no controls, there's no independent trustee, there's no accounting. The media is not very numerate, so they don't like to get into this. They don't see what I see so easily because of my training. And so, yeah, it's basically a bunch of people stealing from the poor to appropriate these aid flows for themselves and for their cronies.
And John Podesta, what do people need to know about John Podesta?
Well, it's curious to me that John Podesta was involved in the tail end of Bill's second term, just at the height of all these scandals. So he was involved when the charity was first birthed. He has his own charity, whose books are a little bit suspect.
You mean CAP?
Yes, the Center for American Progress, and also his ties to Media Matters, which is, Media Matters is a total fraud. It is a political action organization masquerading as a charity, and I've already reported them to New York State. But Podesta seems to be involved, heavily involved here in the political activities, the for-profit activities, and the not-for-profit activities. And you can do all that stuff, but you've got to keep it separate. And a charity can't be involved in politics.
So what are the rules and regulations? Who are the cops on the beat when it comes to charities like this?
Well, for a normal American charity, most American charities operate inside our country, and it's only a small percentage that operate outside the country. So you start out, what you do is you typically form a corporation in a state, and then you have to fill out an application with the IRS after you form the corporation, the nonprofit corporation. And that application is the hook the IRS, the lever the IRS holds over a charity. If you lie in that application, either about your background, your history, or what you intend to do, and the IRS later finds out about it, at any point in time, there's no statute of limitations, they can go back and say, wait a minute, you said you were going to be an archive in Little Rock, and now you're off in Papua New Guinea fighting HIV/AIDS, but you never cleared that change purpose with us. And they can retroactively revoke your charter. The other thing is that here, I gather in DC, there's pretty high taxes, but in a lot of states there aren't. And different states have different attitudes. Once you get your IRS authority to be a charity, you also have to go to each state where you solicit, where there are rules, and you have to fill out more disclosures, and those have to be truthful, and you have to fill out annual reports. And they've never done that right either. Well, on the 990s, those are the annual returns for a charity. And they ask some very thoughtful questions on those 990s. If you were to answer them truthfully, if they had answered the questions truthfully, they would have been caught long ago. In the first instance, attached to a 990, you have to go get an accounting firm to do a real financial audit. Now, I'm trained as a banker. I know the difference between a real audit and a fake audit. And what the Clintons have put attached to their filings, which makes them all non-compliant, are fake audits. They're non-compliant audits. They did not do the work that the accounting firm is supposed to do. While the Clinton Foundation and most public charities don't have to reveal their donors, the charities that donate to the Clinton Foundation, the American ones and some of the foreign ones, have to list out all of their donations. So in the case, for example, of the Gates Foundation, you can go into their private foundation forms, their PF forms, which are very detailed, year by year. And you can look year by year at what the Gates Foundation claims it sent to the Clinton Foundation. You can add that all up. And then you could say, well, let me see if I see that number in this Schedule B, which is, they don't tell you the donor, but you have to aggregate the big donors. And they don't match. And they don't match in material ways. In certain cases, actually, there's a foreign entity called Unitate, which is the biggest donor to the Clinton Foundation. It has sent $650 million towards the Clinton Foundation. And in key periods, specifically the first time Hillary Clinton ran for president in 2007 and 2008, the amounts of money that that Unitate claims it sends in its filings, which are very detailed, it's a Swiss-based organization. They have financial reports and they have annual reports, so they have exhaustive details that do all foot in their reports. But then and they list out the Clinton Foundation, and then when you go into the Clinton Foundation donor report, you don't see numbers anywhere near. There's roughly $100 million missing in the 2007-8 timeframe. Lois Lerner was the very person from around July 2001, when the Clinton Foundation began to migrate away from its true authorized purpose. She was the person who stood within the IRS in a department that was supposed to consider these complex matters. And then she was put in charge of the tax-exempt organizations department, the whole department that sits on top of these charities and would have the authority to decide whom to prosecute and whom not to prosecute, or who to refer to the Department of Justice for prosecution. So the same person who went after the right-leaning conservative groups was the person who gave a pass to this textbook set of cases of fraud for many, many, many years. And that's a very dangerous precedent to let stand. The primary regulator at state level tends to be the Attorney General in a state, so the Attorney General in the state of Arkansas. Now, last year I reached out to that person with a file, and I said, look, this is a rogue charity, and I've gotten no response. I've reached out to multiple Attorneys General across the United States and gotten no response. Now, that may be because, this is a very politically sensitive matter, and maybe they said, well, let's wait and see what happens with the election, and depending on what happens, maybe we'll prosecute or we won't prosecute. So that's, at state level, there are people who regulate it beyond the federal IRS. There's also the FTC, the Federal Trade Commission. And generally speaking, there's one example called the Texas Cancer, or the Tennessee Cancer Charity case, which was roughly a $200 million fraud in several states. And in that case, the FTC led the charge with all 50 attorneys general, got together and exposed this thing and disciplined a $200 million fraud. This is a $2 billion minimum fraud. Now, there are two other ways that you can police this. One is by foreign governments. Generally speaking, foreign governments are not as active as the foreign governments have been with this charity. And there are multiple foreign governments, the government of Australia and Canada and Norway and Ireland, the UK and France. Each of these foreign regimes have the ability to discipline this charity in their home country. And once you are disciplined in one country, you have to notify all the countries of your problem. So that's another angle. The final angle is actually the most dangerous, I think, for the Clinton Foundation, and that is they've taken a lot of money from the Gates Foundation, from I think some from the Bloomberg Foundation, the Rockefeller Foundation. These are all private foundations who must swear on their own tax returns that they've done due diligence and only given grants to charities that are validly organized and operated. And in this case, they haven't done that. And the penalties against the donors normally are incredibly severe.
You've called it the largest unprosecuted charity fraud ever attempted.
The one I mentioned, the Texas Cancer Charity fraud, was $200 million. This is minimum $2 billion declared revenues. Now, the issue with a charity like this is you don't know how much money actually was sent towards the charity. If there are no trustees that care, there's no auditor. There could have been a lot more money sent towards it and diverted before it hit the official books of the charity. So at $2 billion, you are talking about, just at $2 billion, you're talking about the largest unprosecuted. But when you look at the affiliated entities, there are a lot of suspect people, some people who've gone to prison around this charity, were involved with other charities. And when you add all those flows in, you're up at $100 billion or more.
Donna Brazile says, like so many of the Clinton people, that this is Russia, they're trying to influence the elections through these WikiLeaks. But Donna Brazile went on to say that this is an attempt to criminalize behavior that's normal. What do you say, Charles?
And politics is very different than charity. You know, the charity rules are very, very strict, and they're enforced. And actually, the charity world leans to the left, particularly in New York, where I live, New York City. So before I embarked on this project, I went around to some of my friends who run charities. An example would be, I went to college with a guy called Evan Wolfson, who ran a charity to try to get the right for homosexuals to marry. And when the Supreme Court laid down its decision, and he won, he immediately turned off the donate button on his charity. And I noticed that, you know, there's a story about it, and I contacted him. I said, Evan, and I hadn't spoken to him in like 25 years or something. I said, this is amazing. Why are you doing this? Because I take the rules seriously. You know, you're supposed to only raise money for the causes that you've been approved by the IRS to go after on the basis of truthful applications to the IRS. You're not supposed to, in a charity, you know, use it as a criminal enterprise. Indeed, lawyers will tell you, there are memos, great memos written about this, that in a charity, the charity and the people around it are not allowed to commit any illegal acts of any kind anywhere in the world. Your forms has to be true. You know, everything that you do you stand in the shoes of government. And as trustees, you owe a duty of care, which means you have to take the time to make sure that everything's fine. You owe a duty of obedience to the law. You've got to follow the law. And you owe a duty, above all, of loyalty to the charity, so that when your own personal interests conflict with the charity, you have to put the interests of the charity first. Very innocent people, you know, are giving money to this charity. There's, in Bill's book that was published in September 2007, there were these poignant stories of second-grade classes breaking piggy banks to send money to the Clinton Foundation. I mean, there are gullible people, retirees, giving their life savings away to these noble causes without checking any of the paperwork. And enough is enough. I mean, there is a public record here. It is false. It is materially misleading. They are raising money illegally. They have raised billions of dollars illegally. No one really knows where it's gone. And enough is enough. We need to stand up, bring these people to justice. There should be an inquisition, you know, not a commission, an inquisition where charities like this, and there are other charities like this, it's not just the Clinton Foundation, need to be made an example of. Because the very good ones, and there are many great ones in this country, that don't take out television ads and don't run for president based on their charity. They just try to help people. They help them in America and every corner of this country and around the world. And we shouldn't besmirch the good name of those charities. We need to expose this, punish them, let fraudsters understand that when you commit charity fraud, there's a stiff price to pay. Corinne Brand is this congressperson running for office right now, 69-year-old lady in Florida, African-American superdelegate for Hillary. She faces 357 years in prison, federal prison, for a $800,000 alleged slush fund over, I think, 4 or 5 years. You know, why should she face that kind of, thing over her head in the middle of an election when Hillary and Bill Clinton just skate on a minimum $2 billion fraud? I estimate when you consider all the affiliates, it could be more like $100 billion or even more.